Okay. Give it a sec for the recording to be definitely started. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the tooling working group. I'm going to share my screen now so that we can go through the agenda. Screen sharing, begin. If someone could just let me know when they can see the document here.
I can see the
I will remember to zoom it in. Oh, thank you. Okay. So if I could, again, like usual, ask someone to take attendance for me just so that we can have that. It's not super important, just a bit of record keeping. Because I've noticed we have gotten some decent interest in the working group over the last few meetings, so that's been nice, just keeping track of how many people show up. So to start out with, just go and look at last week's action items, which I'm pretty sure we took care of most of them. So last time I was to add a ZenHub link to the community README and the Matrix chat room as well. Both of those are created. They're in a pull request to the governance model. So later when we go over those, we can merge them. Same thing with adding ROS bag 2 bag v2 to the working group subproject. I opened another pull request to do that. Updating the governance model, working with Kyle from Canonical, we came up with a slightly less prescriptive model that we had the TSC look at. They haven't voted on it specifically yet, but I'm much happier with that draft. So this pull request moves it up to this new version, which just prescribes a little bit less process, which I think is better for now while we're still, young and don't need it. Then I made a comment on some ROSBag issue about enabling simulation time. Made sure to let the people there know how they might actually approach it. And then I added the ROSBag 2 QoS feature, which we've been working hard on for the last 2 weeks, onto the Foxy meta ticket. So I don't know if we have Dan here today, but he was planning to. Oh, hey.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Yes, that issue was so we created an issue in ROSBag repo. So my colleague Weihang did it just I think yesterday or the day before.
Okay, in ROSBag.
In ROSBag GitHub project, yeah, or repository. And the second one in the list.
Oh, yeah, great. So we will definitely take a look at this today. Thanks for
it has a full reproducer.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's everything from last meeting. We have this one on the list of things we want to talk about today. Okay, great. We'll probably, top level updates, nothing specifically, so we can go into the project statuses. I noticed that, sorry, I don't know if you go by PJ or Philip, or, but we've got PJ Reed on the call who offered to show us some tools later. So once we're done with some of the administrative stuff, he'll show us some ports of RQ tools to ROS2, which is really handy. Thanks for volunteering to do that. Okay, so I can start for a ROSBag update. We've been working on allowing it to use quality of service profiles for recording and playback, and this is sort of two separate features that we've been adding. We've merged about 13 PRs so far and got a couple left to go. But now the user can specify via the command line a YAML override file that specifies on a per topic basis what QoS profile to use. This is fully enabled for recording, and we're just working on finishing it up for playback. So recording can take override from CLI, QoS profile from CLI. Per topic. We also are recording the QoS profiles offered by publishers in the system. The bag metadata, so now that's there for posterity. We can know what was being offered originally. And then the last thing that's finished so far is that since we only use a single subscription to connect to the multiple publishers in the system, we can only get so close to approximating what's going on, but we now do adaptively figure out what QoS profiles they are offering so that we can now get say latched data from a transient local durability, or we can record best effort topics like the sensor data profile now, which just happens automatically even if you don't specify an override. So recording adapts to default QoS publishers. So that's handy. And now we're trying to finish up the playback portion of all of this. So the data's already stored. We have a lot of the logic around adapting, so it should take a lot less time than getting recording working. One last update is we've got test failures on Windows, which is kind of my top priority today. Well, it's hard to say because we have the API freeze extension on this. I know that ROSBEG 2 is part of ROS base rather than ROS core, so it's not as closely tied, but we still want to get it fully completed, feature complete, as close as possible to that April 8th date. I know we're past it now, but we need to fix these Windows test failures. I got a development environment set up on Windows last night, but I'm not able to yet exactly reproduce what I'm seeing on the build farm. And I'm trying to build the CI Docker images and not having a lot of success. So I might try reaching out to someone. If anyone here has any insight onto creating the Docker image that the CI system uses, I have Docker on my Windows, but I cannot build the Docker file successfully. Fails on installing Python. So we can take it offline, but I could use some help on that to try and get the same environment set up. Yeah, so that's my updates for ROSBEG for right now.
Maybe two quick things to ROSBEG 2. I think I haven't mentioned this last time we spoke. We've merged a pull request for enabling transactions on SQLite.
Oh, yeah.
Or basically generally having some sort of cache where we store the incoming ROS2 messages and then dump them to file in a bulk write. I'm having high hopes that this will also accelerate the performance of it, but it's yet to be benchmarked. But it's basically like configurable. You can expose how large that cache size should be, how many messages you want to store before you actually trigger a write to disk. A second update here, what we decided yesterday offline with Mabel, is that we hold back the Python API for after Foxy. So we can actually flesh that out a little bit more than just having a primitive reader instance for now.
That makes sense to me. I think it would definitely be good to have maybe do a design document around the ROSBEG 2 Python API and try to get a little bit more full sense of what we're trying to build. I've seen a lot from Mabel going into the ROSBEG repo, so definitely appreciating those contributions. Yeah, anything else ROSBEG related that before I move on? Okay. Cross compile is not really under it's not under very active development right now. We had two small features go in from the new member of our team, Snehal, who I believe is on the call. So thank you for that. Those new features are not yet released to pip, but they're now in the repo, and they allow users to specify custom ROS keys to skip for the build. So it's a little, if you have ROSDEP dependencies that are specified in your repository that aren't actually necessary to build, which everyone finds themselves in that case sometimes, especially when they don't control all the aspects of their workspace. This is pretty handy. Yeah. So for system metrics, I'm hoping we have Devin or Projecta on the call.
Yeah, hey.
How that's going. Hey.
So there isn't a whole lot going on, but the biggest things are we've split a lot of the core components into a separate library, so a separate package. This is so we can use them in RCL CPP for topic statistics. And then the current work in flight for system metrics is merging some of the PRs that have the standalone topics node for anyone who wants to use them.
Cool. And then this core components is what's going to back the topic statistics feature is the plan, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then there are some PRs open already. If you in flight, we have the work tracked, and I think it's the roadmap issue.
There's been a lot of work going on the GitHub actions, but Thomas would be the best to speak to that. And I don't see that he's dialed in today.
He said he won't be here. He did say that he was trying out some of the multiple BCS repo fixes he introduced.
Yeah, this is not setup ROS, but action ROS CI.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a bug in Colcon LCOV, which wasn't generating, or basically needed a version bump, so that fixes in and setup ROS.
Yeah, and I don't know how far he is on this, but Thomas is experimenting with container-based builds for all of this. So I think he's trying to get us more reliable because we've been having a lot of flakiness problems with the apt repositories. So that sounds promising. It looks like he's making a little bit of progress. I don't think it's anywhere ready for prime time. Okay, so any other existing project status updates we should capture before we move on to the next section? Okay. I'm going to go to the community now. So we have, let's look at the ones that are, it's quite simple. If I have some sign-offs already, I don't have it requiring an anonymous unanimous approval from the reviewers group or the approvers group, but I figure if I put them up, at least a week before the meeting, we've got time to look at it. All this PR does is moves the meeting section down into a governance section and then adds communication channels and backlog management to it. So I created a matrix chat room for the ROS tooling working group. So far, there's no one in it, but if anyone wanted to try using that for live chat, I did that because the security working group does it as well, and it seems like a pretty convenient cross-platform option. I can use the same client to connect to the ROS IRC, so that's why I find it handy. For now, I think probably we're good with that. Unless anyone has any objections, I'm going to merge it, but I wanted to wait for the group. Cool. And if anyone has any suggestions for live chat channels, if that's something desirable outside of Matrix, totally willing to take suggestions on that. The other thing is also a small one, which adds a single line, which is just adding this ROS1 bag reader plugin to the ROS bag 2 project. So again, unless there's any concern, I'm just going to merge that because I got a sign off here, so it meets the requirements set by the GitHub stuff. And then the last one, which I'd like folks to take a look at like in more detail before I merge, just in case anyone cares, is this one changes up the structure of the governance model a little bit. And one of the major changes that it makes is that it removes the concept of a subproject owner. The intention being that if we just have a sort of bag of separately moderated projects, it doesn't feel like the working group itself has a sort of cohesive feeling to it. So I think the intention here is to remove this subproject owner thing and realize that as a working group, if we have the project, we own it and we have to maintain it. And that way it takes the onus off of individuals, which was one of the goals of having a working group, was to have this more collective ownership and governance of these projects. So that's one of the things, is it removes this concept, which simplifies things a little bit. It also changes the approval standards required for things. Instead of making it more complicated, now we just say like every change requires unanimous approval from the approvers in the working group, which is reflected by the teams on the GitHub organization right now. And other than that, it just moves this governance model, removes subproject owners, makes it kind of simple for all the requirements, just unanimous agreement from approvers for things. So I'd like folks to have a day or two to look at this. I think I'll merge it end of day Monday or something if no one has any complaints. So I will thank everyone to look at that if you care about that particular bit of minutia. Cool. And then in the interest of not using up too much of PJ's time, I'd like to go on to the demo if you're ready to do that. Because I appreciate you dialing in today. I have not seen you before, so I don't think you're normally dialed in.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Cool. Yeah, I've dialed in a couple of times before. I haven't actually said much today, or said much yet.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, sorry. It's a long list.
Yeah, it is pretty long. I was having a couple of connection problems at the beginning of the meeting, but I think I got it all sorted out.
All right, well, let's see if we can see your screen and you can show us those projects you linked. You should be able to take over screen share from me.
I think so. I just have to navigate through all the options. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Cool. So like I mentioned in the discourse post, the group that I'm in has been working on porting some of the Gui tools that we use in ROS 1 to ROS 2. So I figured I'd show off a few of them. In the upper right over here, we've got the RQT Runtime Monitor, which is just a simple diagnostics viewing tool. I know it's one of the standard RQT plugins in ROS 1. So I would have assumed it was pretty well known, but it seemed like there wasn't a ROS 2 port of it already, so I went ahead and did one. It's pretty handy if you've got hardware that is producing diagnostics and you want to monitor it. And in my garage here, I have a Rover Robotics Open Rover that has some different sensors mounted on it that I've been using for ROS 2 testing. So it's pretty handy to be able to look at the hardware diagnostics for it. And one of the other guys in our group has also been working on porting the RQT Robot Monitor, which is a different diagnostics monitor that's intended for aggregated diagnostics. It works together with the diagnostics aggregator node to organize your diagnostics into more logical groups. It's not quite ready yet, so I don't have it to show off, but that is about all there is for the runtime monitor. It's pretty straightforward.
So is your teammate working on porting the diagnostics aggregator package as well?
He did. So we were going to do that. He found that there was actually somebody else who had already started a port of it.
Yeah, that's our group at Bosch. We actually have that on our roadmap.
Yeah, Bosch. Okay,
nice.
so
So
yeah.
please feel free to ping me and destroy everything we did if it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that he's working on getting it up and running right now, so we'll let you know if anything needs to change.
Cool. Sounds good.
But yeah. So the next thing I got is in the bottom right of my screen here. I've got the Swiri console. And of course, the first question is, why would you ever want something other than RQT console? And in our experience, so this was meant to solve two problems. One is that RQT console is pretty slow when it's under heavy load. On some of the robots we work on, their nodes produce thousands of messages per second. And you can easily end up with millions of messages in memory if you leave it running for a couple of hours. And under that kind of load, RQT console really crawls to a halt. And so we wrote our own console tool in C++ that's designed to be super fast. So it can handle thousands of logs arriving at once and still be perfectly responsive. And the other thing that this is meant to address is that RQT console is super configurable and you can make it do anything you want. But 99% of the time, the only thing we want to do is look at the logs for a couple of different nodes and optionally search for a value in them or filter out logs that we don't care about. So this is designed to require minimal configuration. You just open it up, you get a list of all the nodes that are producing logs, and you can select which ones you want to look at. And so in my case here, my Novatel GPS is producing lots of logs because it can't see any satellites right now, and it doesn't know where it is. So we can put in a couple of strings here to filter out the logs that we don't care about. Yeah, we'll just give Yeah, and now after we've filtered out all the ones that it's spamming, we have a slightly better view that we can scroll through to see what those nodes have been doing in the past. And the include and exclude fields are designed to be pretty flexible. By default, they just take a substring that they filter by, but you can also turn on the ability to filter by regular expressions if you need to do something fancier. And you can also pretty easily turn off specific types of logs if you don't want to see them anymore. Although I think that's not working in ROS2 yet, but theoretically it will be. One of the other things that we could do in ROS1 that isn't working in ROS2 yet is we wanted to be able to dynamically change the logger levels of nodes. And in the ROS1 version of Swiri console, you can right-click on a node and it will call the service to get a list of all of its loggers and what their logging levels are, and then you can just pick what you want them to log at here and it'll change it. But it looks like that isn't a standard part of the logging subsystem in ROS2 yet. So hopefully that is coming soon, and if not, we might look into that to figure out what we need to do to enable that. And another handy thing it can do is it can save logs and read them back in. So you can save logs out to bag files or read in logs from a bag file, and also save it to just a plain text CSV file if you want to be able to view it with something else. So that is pretty much it for Swiri console. Did you have any questions about that?
Yeah, so is it getting all of its logs by subscribing to ROS out?
Yes, it does.
Okay, and then you said you mentioned it being built in C++. Is the RQ console right now? I'm not familiar with it. Is that built in Python?
Yes, it's all Python.
Oh, gotcha. Cool.
Yeah, so usually whenever we're having performance problems with a Python script, the first thing we do is rewrite it in C++. So
yeah, I think that's a common solution.
Yep.
Cool, looks good.
Thanks. In this window over here, the big thing that we've been working on a lot is MapViz, which is a tool for doing orthographic visualizations of ground-based robots. And so the first question is, how is this different from RViz? And it's pretty similar in that it's plugin based. So you can write your own plugins that do whatever you want and add them in. And we've got a big list of plugins that support lots of different common data types and expose different functions. And what this is really good for is, though, if you can assume that you're on a orthographic plane that is tied to a ground-based robot, that simplifies a lot of your calculations and lets you do some things that are kind of hard to do in RViz. One of the obvious things I've got up right now is I have a tile map in the background. So if you can tie the origin of your ROS coordinate frames to a WGS84 coordinate, then MapViz can pretty easily add any arbitrary tile map server and display tiles from that underneath all of your stuff. My localization system is a little bit off right now, so pretend that the point cloud you're seeing is slid over a few meters and rotated about 15 degrees. But so this is really nice if you're actually like driving a car, for example, and you want to be able to follow the path that your car is taking along streets or through neighborhoods or whatever. And it's also pretty trivial to transform between points in arbitrary ROS coordinates and WGS84 latitude longitude coordinates. I've got another plugin up here, the Point Click Publisher, that will let you click on an arbitrary point and then it will publish it in a arbitrary coordinate frame. Right now I've set my frame to WGS84, which is a special frame that MapViz can interpret to transform between ROS coordinates and WGS84 coordinates. So if I want to know like where this house over here is, I can just click on it and it publishes it to the topic listed there and also prints it in the dialog down here. So that makes it really easy to figure out where things are in global coordinates compared to your robot. So for some of the other plugins that I've got up and running here, you can see on my robot I've got a Velodyne VLP16 that's producing a point cloud, and also a Intel RealSense camera that's producing the camera feed in the upper left, and the white line that you see there is a laser scan coming out of the camera. So I'll drive my robot back and forth just a little bit. I've also got RTab map running on here to produce an occupancy grid. I don't have it configured very well, so it's not producing a very good occupancy grid, but it is one, and that's all I really care about right now. I think the rotation is drifting a little bit because my IMU, but you can also see when the robot turns, there's an attitude indicator in the upper right. It's a little bit more interesting if a robot's going up and down a hill, so you can see the circle bob up and down. And let's see. There's a couple of other interesting plugins we've got here, like there's a Draw Polygon plugin that you can use to draw arbitrary polygons that it will then publish out in whatever frame you want. So, for example, I can just start clicking on the map after adding that. And you can click Publish Polygon and it will publish it to the topic printed there in the example frame. This is really handy if you want to be able to do something like generate an obstacle map of your own, and you want to be able to easily draw coordinates in any arbitrary frame. And let's see, is there anything else super interesting to show off here? I can display markers and marker arrays and texture markers, although right now my robot's not producing any of those, so there's not anything to look at. One of the things we've also tried to do with MapViz is make writing plugins really simple. It's all C++ based, but there's a pretty simple plugin API, and all you really have to do is implement a Qt UI for your configuration pane, and then you get a QGL widget that you can draw on top of. And you can draw using either OpenGL commands or using a Q painter. So some of the things like the Polygon plugin and markers are drawn using OpenGL, but other things like the odometry or the string plugin, if you want to render a string, are done using a Q painter just because it has a lot of really simple functions for doing that. And you don't have to worry about all the OpenGL overhead. Let's see. Yeah. That's obviously not a very useful string to just print in my MapViz window, but that's all right. And another nice thing about having all of our plugins rendered in 2D like this is that it makes controlling the order they're rendered in really simple. So if you have plugins that you want to draw over on other plugins, that's controlled by just dragging the order the plugins are listed in the window over here. So if I want my point cloud to be underneath the image there, I can just drag that up. And now because the point cloud plugin is above the image plugin there, it's rendered first. So now the point cloud goes under the image in the upper left. A couple of other neat things that are built in is it's really easy to switch between different image transports. So if you've got an image publisher that is publishing image using image transport, you can pick which one you want to subscribe to. Typically picking compressed helps responsiveness quite a bit, so you're not transmitting uncompressed images everywhere. And you can set that either per image topic. Every image plugin has its own transport selection menu. Or you can also set the default one for every image plugin that you create. And down on the bottom right, there's also some buttons for handy features we use a lot. It's really trivial to take a screenshot, or you can click the record button to actually make a video recording of it, and then pause or stop the video recording. So that's really nice for making demo videos if you want to show off something to a client. And if you ever get lost and forget where you are and have trouble finding where your robot is currently at, there's a button on the bottom right to just recenter. And we're right there. So I think that is most of what I've got to show off. Did you have any questions about MapViz?
That looks like a pretty handy tool. I'm wondering what was the decision around putting it into its own top-level program versus implementing as a series of RViz plugins? Because it seems like most of the functionality I see here, you're not restricted from doing in using RViz plugin, but I don't know all the details.
I think a lot of it could be done as RViz plugins. It is kind of hard to do some of them just because you have to deal with drawing a z-axis or drawing polygons in 3 dimensions, whereas MapViz flattens everything into 2 dimensions, which simplifies a lot of the operations.
Yeah, so there are, I mean, like the occupancy grid map display in there, I believe just renders a texture to a single, 2 triangles to make a square sort of thing. Would it maybe make it easier if there was a pre-existing 2D scene in RViz that could be utilized instead of, beside the 3D scene sort of thing?
Probably, yeah. And we also wanted to make the plugin API simpler, so it was really easy to drop in a new plugin.
Are you using plugin lib or a different solution?
Yeah, it's using plugin lib. And I actually need to go plug in my laptop because my battery is getting a little bit low.
Speaking of plugging in.
Have you tried this at all in simulation?
Yeah, actually, it's one of the things that we use it fairly often for is playing back bag files. which I haven't tested in ROS 2 yet, but in ROS 1, a really common use case for us was to record a bag file off of a vehicle that was driving around out in the open, and then come back later and play back that bag file in MapViz. And if you're using a simulation tool like Gazebo or AirSim, it's pretty similar with those, since as long as they publish ROS topics like everything else.
Yeah. Well, unless anyone else has any other questions, thanks so much for showing us this stuff today. Really good stuff. The diagnostics definitely is handy. I agree with you that it seems like it's way underutilized for how useful it is. I had integrated it into a robot at my previous job and was surprised at how little there was in terms of opened issues or activities around it. It seemed like people just weren't using it very much.
Yeah, actually, another thing that MapViz is good at that RViz doesn't do so well is forwarding over a X display.
Yeah, that
frequently
can be really hard with OpenGL.
Yeah, like on some of our vehicles, we'll have a laptop that we use for monitoring or controlling it that will SSH into the vehicle and then remotely launch whatever tools we need on that vehicle. And RViz, OpenGL usually doesn't perform super well over a X connection. And MapViz, it'll use OpenGL acceleration if it's available, but even if it can't use OpenGL, it can still draw to a 2D surface perfectly fine. So it works pretty well over a remote connection.
Yeah, the way I've handled that in the past is you would just open up the ROS communication, via a VPN or something, and then you run the visualizer locally.
Yeah, sometimes that works fine, although my experience with ROS 2 in particular is that getting it to work over a VPN is a nightmare.
I haven't tried yet.
That is the downside of using multicast UDP for everything.
Yeah, I know like Connext has a bridge for WAN-based connections, but I don't think FastRDPS or Cyclone are offering those yet, although someone could correct me, I'm not the expert. But that's something that I think ROS 2 needs, which is not what you were talking about here, but it's something that's been on my mind, is how do you sort of reliably connect to ROS 2 systems over the internet to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thanks
Cool.
so much.
So,
Really appreciate you showing this off today.
Yeah, thanks for letting me show it off.
Yes, we are always happy to have show and tell participants. We don't have one every week, so if anyone else has anything they want to show off, please do not hesitate to sign up for one of the future meetings.
Yeah, and we're looking for more GUIs to port to ROS 2 as well, so if there's any other tools that are useful to you that don't exist yet, let us know.
Yeah, for sure.
That's also good that I heard your presentation today. So I just looked at the related ticket you created and created the necessary ROS 2 branch, so you can go ahead and do a pull request for the runtime monitor stuff. So
sure, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Feel free to poke me if you don't hear anything. It's usually
okay.
one of the Libos which gets the least attention.
Okay. Well then, I'll move us on to the discussions we wanted to have. I think the primary one was about making sure that we triage this issue. So I will bring up the project board, and then we should be able to see that. Let's see. Yes, we only have 16 issues under new. This view is a little big. If I make it a little bit smaller, can you all still see that okay?
Yeah.
It's fine to me.
Okay. Cool. So let's see. We've got a lot of stuff going on. This high priority one that we had been staring at is now well in progress and into the slip time. Well, I guess technically the ROS base freeze or initial release date was the 13th, so kind of a couple days away from the initial freeze for that. We might go a little bit past it, but that was initial evaluation release for ROSBag, so we're going to try and get those features feature complete as soon as possible, and then be working on stability coming up to the release. then we'll take a look at the new issues. I think the backlog itself is still in some sort of an order. We're trying to keep bugs, or at least bugs we think are user affecting, as close to the top as possible. And let's just take a look at the new issues right now so that we've looked at these. Not obvious how to correctly build from source on Action ROS CI. And interesting, ROS distro source is the point that we want to build the latest. Oh, so an empty string is the solution. Yeah, okay, so this kind of seems like a documentation issue. It can do the thing that we want it to do, but it is not clear immediately how to do that. So as a documentation bug, we'll send this to the top of the backlog. We've got some other writing sort of on a related note that we want to be doing before the Foxy release. One of the things on my team's plate, probably I'll be doing it, is updating the QoS section of the ROS2 wiki in order to explain all of the new features that have gone in since dashing, because that page it does not fully introduce the concept, so it'll be easier for people to get lost. So we should make sure to take a look at this before the Foxy release is all wrapped up. I think that's, you know, sort of our hard line for documentation is that May date. Someone correct me if it needs to be in sooner than that, but of course we'll try to get it in sooner, but at the very least, by the time people start to use Foxy, we want to have documentation there for them. Okay. Action cannot run standalone as in packages, not listed as prerequisites. And, oh yeah, when was the last meeting? Oh, I guess it was a March date. Okay, it's like, did we not look at this? In the CI environment, so you need to document that it, oh, I see. Okay, so dependencies were getting installed by setup ROS that Action ROS CI wasn't explicitly talking about. And we even have what looks like a PR open to do this. And I think all the checks are good and it's all approved. Is there any reason we haven't merged this? Anyone who's on the line? We had a conversation about whether LCOV result was actually optional. Oh, and we were thinking about adding this to the agenda of this meeting. We don't have Thomas. Do we have anyone else who might have context on this? I think we should merge this because in practice it's actually optional right now. And once we have made it required explicitly, then we can mark it so. I'd rather describe what it does accurately than be purely aspirational with it. Anybody have any objections to merging this PR now? Oh, it's out of date. Never mind. We'll let the CI run. For now, I'll make sure that it is in review. Okay. Along with this PR, which is in review. Great. Okay. ROSBag 2, expose reading selective topic to command line playback. Expose the functionality. Okay, so there's a filter for reading selective topics from the reader, which is for playback. And we want a, okay, yeah, this is a feature request, seems useful. We just want the command line to know how to play back specific topics instead of all of them.
I think there's already a PR for this as well.
Is there? I don't see this issue referenced, but I believe, oh, yes it is. I just didn't get the formatting correctly. Okay, so that's in review, which means this issue is also in review, and
Yeah, and I think it changes some of the ROS2 bag. Well, technically it doesn't, but if someone can take a quick look, it's not that big of a PR. Just to make sure there's no like major issues there.
Okay. Yeah. So it's in review. We'll yeah. Do we have reviewers requested on here?
Yeah, I reviewed it myself. So.
Okay. Well, if we want other people to look at it, maybe we should send out the request. I'm just gonna say approvers. No. Oh, because this isn't on the ROS tooling organization. I'm just gonna request myself and Karsten real quick, just so that someone gets pinged to take a look. Okay. Great. Let's see. Let's make sure that we get this undefined behaviors one. I'm going to try and look at all of them, but this is sort of a project board until we run out of time because people have schedules. So when we exceed the maximum recording capacity, is this when you run out of disk space on the machine, or
I'm pretty sure you have a hard time to run out of disk space when it comes to SQLite.
Yeah.
No, that's not what the title should convey. The title should basically says that with this reproducer, the tool with the default configuration, which is eloquent and faster TPS, exits in different.
Oh, okay. So it's
with different behaviors.
It's a bandwidth constraint problem, not a system resources constraint. Well, I guess bandwidth is a resource, but yeah. Anyways. Okay. So it's networking performance issue here, or that it can't put the messages away fast enough into storage.
I would refrain from speculating because we have not gone down to start narrowing this down. So I think it requires somebody to actually start narrowing down and finding where the problem is.
Gotcha. Okay, so you have a reproducer case, but not information about what the actual bottleneck portion is causing it.
Correct. So
we should put this. We'll put this on the backlog. I agree, it is a bug. I wonder, do we have a label for like performance or anything? Nope, that's okay. That's not necessary. Bugs go to the top. I think that's something we're going to be trying to do in between when we finalize this QoS feature and when the full release goes out, is we're going to try and take a hard look at all of the bugs that remain on the backlog here, so we can solve as many of them as possible. Stability would be really nice for this release. We can put bug fixes into patches or whatever, but it'd be nice to get them out the door in the first place. Okay, so for action ROS CI, pull request hook fails to find path spec. This seems like flakiness on the infrastructure. I've had this happen before, and then I just rerun the jobs and it works, which isn't to say that that's good, but that I have also seen this and seen it resolve itself. And it feels like it has something to do with, especially, this is on the VCS step. I've seen it on the checkout step.
I mean, at the end of the day, with that scale, you will always have the case that network is not reliable, right?
Sorry, can you say that again, a little louder?
There's always going to be at that scale a case where network is not, the error message is confusing, but that network is going to fail you is always going to be an issue at that scale.
Yeah.
We have like so many cases in the ROS build form where it's doing like an apt-get update and do something, and it's like just automatically retrying 3 times because, hey, it just happens.
Yeah, okay, so this seems to happen occasionally. Maybe we need some retry logic to check out. Just a comment for, not that helpful, but a little bit of context. We'll add it to the backlog. Definitely not going to call this closed until we do something about it. At the very least, say we know exactly what's happening and we can't fix it. Okay, add better app sources. This is that the Azure, I know Thomas is working on this, so I'm going to say that this is, he's working on this by using the Docker containers, which is connecting directly to the Ubuntu apt repos, which are more reliable than these Microsoft ones so far in our experience. This is a draft pull request, I believe. I'm going to move it to review, even though it's not quite in review. Maybe I'll say it's in progress. That makes sense for draft PRs to me. Make step failures more specific than bash failed. I agree. It really sucks to have to open up the thing and scroll down through thousands of lines.
I feel like this involves a lot of parsing because you need to create like a new, I forgot what it's called in GitHub Actions, like a notification window or something like that.
Yeah, it may be difficult to implement though. I don't know if it's going to be an immediate priority, though it is useful.
Yeah, it's a nice to have.
Yeah, so as a nice to have, I think I'm going to slap help wanted on it. Just because I don't see us having any immediate plan. I'm going to move it to the bottom of the backlog for now. We do have limited development resources. Use Microsoft Setup MS Build. This seems better. To backlog to look. Also, PR is welcome. But Dan Rose, definitely, he's been busy. Okay, so this is document the QoS profile override behavior in the wiki. Yeah, we want to do this. This is not just an enhancement. This is, oh, we don't have documentation on here anymore. I'm going to go add that back to ROSback real quick. I don't know. Why did we get rid of it? It's there by default, isn't it? Anyways, yeah, we'll be working on this probably in the upcoming 2 weeks or so. So I'm just going to assign it to ROS because I believe that's who's going to write this, but we can reassign it later.
Wait, I thought we discussed this yesterday. Anyway,
we have a separate tracking issue for it.
Oh, okay, never mind.
On the AWS roadmap repo, but I had already added it to the ROSbag backlog as just related to that feature set we were working on. So we can close them both out at the same time.
Nice, sounds good.
Okay, failure building, lib statistics collector on OSX. This looks like it is planned work that Devin's got on his plate, so we'll leave that to that. Failure building, this on Windows, same deal. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and this is, how's this different? This was add both of those builds and then oh, this is a bug and this is a PR. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, you should see two issues, one for Windows failure, one for OS X failure.
Gotcha. Okay. Is this a draft PR right now?
It shouldn't be. I've just been bumping versions. I think you even approved it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So this is review then. I don't know why I didn't automatically go there. I feel like PRs should be in review. Add support for binary distributions. Okay. Still binary arbitrary ROS2 distributions on Mac. For setup ROS. I understand this. And then this is me doing adaptive publishing QoS for the playback of a bag. I think the feature works, but I don't have any tests on it yet, so I need to finish that up today, as well as figure out what's going on with the Windows test failures. And if anybody who works on ROSBag has a Windows setup, if you could also let me know if you're able to reproduce the build farm test failures, that would just help give me another data point at least. I get test failures, but they're not the same ones, so it's a little concerning. Sorry, this is in progress. So that's everything on the backlog. And we are at time. So I appreciate everyone dialing in today. Thanks, VJ, for the demo, for showing off those tools. And the next meeting is planned for April 24th. So far, I haven't gotten any complaints about the timing. Of course, voice that in the discourse thread if anyone wants to schedule it any differently. Otherwise, we'll keep going as we have been. So thanks so much for coming. I will see you all again the next time.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks again.